So I sold my entire game collection. Well, most of it, and I'll tell you why. I'm not like most video game collectors on YouTube. My goal was to collect all the games I've always wanted to play since childhood. I wanted games I thought were all-time classics and games I had nostalgia for. When I got my first job after college, I started to make more money than I ever had before and began splurging on my collection. I tried to make sure all the games I bought were in very good condition, complete with the case and manual, with the exception of Nintendo cartridges, because it's rare to find boxes for those games, and it would have cost me a lot more money to buy those. Most of the games I bought were from eBay because I found it easier to find games in the condition you want to buy on eBay. Sometimes I would buy games at my local game stores, but sometimes they didn't have what I needed and were often priced higher than games I could buy from eBay. I had an original Nintendo, Super Nintendo, N64, GameCube, Wii, Sega Genesis, Sega Dreamcast, an original Xbox, an Xbox 360, a PlayStation 1, a PlayStation 2, an original Game Boy, a Game Boy Color, a Game Boy Advance, a 3DS, and a PSP. I bought most of the classic Mario games, Sonic 1 through 3 and Sonic and Knuckles, Mortal Kombat 1 through 3, the best James Bond games, wrestling games, Dragon Ball Z Budokai, GTA 3, GTA Vice City, Banjo-Kazooie, Turok, Halo 1 through 3, Gears of War 1 through 3, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Dance Dance Revolution, Guitar Hero 3, Star Fox, Mega Man, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Contra, and many other classics. Eventually, I ran out of games on my wish list, completed my collection, and realized I didn't have time to play them all even if I tried playing throughout the rest of my life, which would take time away from my other priorities. Getting through my backlog of games started to feel more like a chore rather than a hobby I enjoyed. I was annoyed trying to swap out consoles every time I wanted to play a different one that wasn't currently hooked up to my TV, and I didn't have space or the creativity to figure out a more optimized setup. I was also concerned about protecting my games from damage and stressed about keeping them in the best condition possible. It overwhelmed me, and I was getting older and feeling kind of ashamed about the money and time I spent on my collection and my priorities in life. One day I decided I should begin selling through my collection on eBay to make it smaller and more manageable. This would help me recoup some of the money I felt I had wasted and would give me the opportunity to once again focus more on actually playing my games rather than collecting them. One by one, I sold through the games and consoles I was least interested in playing, and only keeping games I knew for sure I wanted to play, and games I could potentially play with my future kids and family. As I sold through the collection, I felt more and more relieved to let go of what I felt was a huge burden in my life. Now I was finally able to focus on playing through my games. As I began playing through my retro games, I realized many of these games are no longer games I enjoy playing in the modern era of video games. Some of the old systems that take carts were annoying to deal with because sometimes the games wouldn't show on the screen, or it would freeze and then I had to blow in my carts for 10 minutes like it was the 90s again. I know the carts have a lot of charm to them and people are nostalgic, but I don't want to feel like that was a hurdle every time I wanted to play again. It feels like such a waste of time. I also started to realize how difficult a lot of these games were. And many of them had annoying game mechanics, like if you lose all your lives, you had to start the entire game over from the beginning, and some of them only allowed you to save at a specific checkpoint, which made you feel like you wasted a lot of time and progress if you died right before the next checkpoint. Another annoyance I found was, especially in the early first-person shooters, their controls were awful. By now there's pretty much an industry-wide standard in the controls of first-person shooters. Back then it was new, and for some reason a lot of these games thought that it was a good idea to implement inverted look controls. The N64's first-person shooters specifically were aggravating, because the controller itself was designed in such a strange way and had only one analog stick. After realizing that I actually didn't enjoy a lot of the games I kept, I continued selling through my collection. Now I was left with a super small collection of mostly games that I could casually play with friends and family. Around this time, I bought a Nintendo Switch and some of its best games, and also got really into PC gaming and started buying a ton of games on Steam when they were on sale. Now my problem of having too big of a game collection and choice paralysis started to come back. Having experienced this issue before, I started to slow down my game purchases. I slowly played through most of the games I bought and tried my best to get rid of games I didn't want to play anymore. I would sell my Switch games on eBay, and since you can't sell Steam games, I would just remove them from my library one by one. I ran out of Switch games I wanted to buy, and I'm still primarily a PC gamer now, but I really started to miss how relaxing it was to play video games on the couch in my living room rather than playing it at my computer desk. Now enters the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck was a game changer for me. I loved the fact that I could finally play most of my PC games where I wanted in the form of this amazing handheld. I bought a dock for the Steam Deck so I could hook it up to my TV and play it with a controller just like a gaming console. This allowed me to begin playing games with my girlfriend and greatly improved my gaming life. As gaming once again became a hobby I could enjoy socially with someone in the same room, rather than me isolating myself in my computer room and not including anyone else in my hobby. Around this time, I started watching a lot of YouTube videos about games and handhelds. Now, I had sold off all my handhelds years ago, and I decided I wanted to buy a couple of them again. I didn't buy all the handhelds I once owned, like any of the Game Boys or the PSP. I decided if I wanted to buy a handheld, it should be a handheld I was actually going to use. I decided against Game Boys because most of them don't have a backlit screen, and most of their games can be played on a modded 3DS or a modded PS Vita. I also didn't buy a PSP because I actually never really liked any of the PSP games. Also, I thought the PS Vita was clearly superior, not just because of the internal specs, but also because it has 2 analog sticks. So I ended up buying the original 3DS, which is my go-to handheld for taking on trips, since it can easily slide in my pocket, and it's very durable. I also bought a 3DS XL because some 3DS games can only be played on the XL, and the XL is much more comfortable to play compared to the smaller version. I also bought a PS Vita and modded all 3 of these handhelds, only putting my favorite handheld games on them and some of my favorite Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis games. I was in the zone for modding, so I ended up modding my Wii as well. I honestly don't play these handhelds very much, but I decided I will never sell these because in my opinion, they are the greatest handhelds ever made, and the big 3 game companies no longer make handhelds like these. Also, I most likely will play these handhelds from time to time since they are very easy to play anywhere I want, and I can even play them while my fiance is watching TV, or I can play them while spending time hanging out with my future kids. During the process of modding these handhelds, I learned that emulation is actually way better than I ever realized. Now, I always used to be very against emulation because I thought the best way to play games was on original hardware. This was mostly based on the nostalgia I had for these games growing up. But after playing a few games using RetroArch on the PS Vita, I realized how convenient emulation is. The 3 best features of emulation are: you have access to a library of games at your fingertips. You can customize the controls, which helps a lot, especially with the first-person shooters on N64. You can create save states at any point in the game, even if the game requires a checkpoint to save. This basically creates an easy mode for retro games that allow you to get through them much faster without wasting a ton of progress. On top of emulation, there are also PC ports of games that significantly improve the games with quality of life improvements. For example, I recommend looking into Mario 64 Co-op Deluxe and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time port called Ships of Harkinian. These two ports allow you to modernize the graphics, help them run at 60 frames per second or higher, and add many other features that fix annoying aspects of the original games. Now that I've come to all these realizations, I'll never waste money building up a huge retro collection again. With all that said, if you can relate to anything I've said so far in this video, I highly recommend that you let go of your collection and only keep the systems and games that are most important to you. Having a huge video game collection will make it much less likely that you'll be able to focus on immersing yourself in games you actually love. I realized gaming is much more fulfilling when you have one game you absolutely love and can't put down, versus just dabbling in different games here and there, thinking about gaming and suffering from choice paralysis. To decide if letting go of your collection is something you should do, you need to have some self-awareness and realize you'll probably feel better with less games than you will owning a ton of them, just so you can reach some arbitrary collection goal you have. A lot of collection is just a mental trap. I don't understand how the human mind works, but something about video game collecting can be extremely addicting and can be dangerous if you never reach a point where you feel satisfied. In conclusion, I suggest that you stop buying video games until you finish or at least get through most of your backlog. Set goals of beating games, or if it's a game you can't necessarily beat, you can make a goal of reaching a playtime of at least 40 hours. And if you still enjoy the game, feel free to get to 80 hours or more, as long as it doesn't feel like a chore. Once you reach these goals, you'll no longer have to feel guilty about not getting your money's worth, and you can sell the game, or remove it from your Steam library, or just move on to the next game. Make it easier on yourself. Play digital versions on emulators, and play PC ports to not only make it easier to set up the game, but offer much needed quality of life changes. Don't torture yourself for the sake of nostalgia. I did that for years, and the old experience just doesn't hold up anymore now that I have so many other modern games to play and compare them to. If you got any value out of this video, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel. Thanks guys, and see you in the next video.